All right, hey there, this is John Chen, and it's API Heritage Month, right? So, API Heritage Month is the month of May to celebrate all things Asian Pacific Islander. I'm really excited. I've probably got 6 or 7 programs around this month, all looking at different things to, again, celebrate Asian Pacific Islander culture. And again, we started on May 1st, where we had a 5-hour live stream using multi camera technology. I believe it's actually the first festival that has been streamed live from the Seattle Center. So that was actually an experiment for them in looking at the technology about doing hybrid from there. So that's exciting that we're actually doing some things. Of course, if you're watching the national news, you might have seen some events here in Dallas. And that's another piece of why we're also looking to celebrate here API Heritage Month. And that the key piece here is stop Asian hate, right? I think 3 Asian women were shot in that incident. And that is not the only incident. If you really do the research, there are multiple pieces of this, and there is very strong data that this trend is growing, and that is not what needs to happen here. So this is what we're all doing as part of our piece here, as part of API Heritage Month. Now, the exciting part is that this part is around executives, Asian Pacific Islander executives. So did you know that Asian Pacific Islanders in America have twice the national average in advanced degrees, a bachelor's and up? But Asian Pacific Islanders have 50% or less of the executive jobs in both government, nonprofits, and corporations. And I think the stats go that you have a better chance of becoming executive if you're black or a woman, right, or Hispanic, than Asian. And number one, why is that? And number two, for many of us who are in the fields, we have gone through meetings, looked around, and going, hey, we're the only Asian executive in the room right now. And so I think it's something we get a chance to talk about. Most importantly, we get a chance during this 2 hours to really look and talk to Asian Pacific Islanders who have become executives and looking at what helped them become successful, and most importantly, what advice can we give to other Asian Pacific Islanders who would like to become executives? We would like you, by the way, to come join the ranks and really help solve this problem. So the first piece that I have here is I'm going to introduce my co-host today. It's really cool. As part of this program, been able to meet new people, and that's actually one of the key parts. Number one is have these discussions, and number two, to meet other people, and hopefully meet other people like you or are inside of this group that if you look around, maybe not be apparent. And so during this time, Kevin and I have gotten a chance to meet each other. This guy is currently the Chief Strategy Officer of Bizly.com. And what he didn't know, what I didn't know earlier, he was actually a music star in Hawaii. And I think that's also impressive. So let's bring up the one and only Kevin Iwamoto.
Hi.
There you go, Kevin. How was that intro?
No, that was terrific. You're definitely a pro, John.
Thank you so much. I love the two. Kevin and I are like looking on the API Heritage Month playlist, and Kevin's just like, "Where's my song?" Kevin, for those who don't know you, can you do me a favor and tell the rest of the guests what you do at Bisley, who you are, and what you do at Bisley?
So I actually changed positions and roles into a chief customer officer and head of enterprise role. So Bisley is a meeting software company that specializes in small hybrid meetings, much of which, most of America is uh, doing right now, as they re-engage with each other internally, as well as they re-engage with their customers and the marketplace that they compete in and stuff. So our software technology is really built to make a real easy self-service option for people to organize a meeting without having any kind of meeting background experience.
Wow.
And so that's kind of how we enable companies to kind of get back to business, if we will. And because most of the meetings that are happening today,
Yeah.
post-pandemic, or as we move from pandemic into endemic, is exactly our wheelhouse, right? It's like 10 people, maybe less, maybe more. Sometimes they require sleeping rooms. Sometimes it's a hybrid meeting where you have 3 people from the office and maybe 5 people or 10 people from home,
Yeah.
phoning in or on Zoom or whatever. So our software kind of enables that collaboration and enablement, if you will,
Mm.
for people to collaborate, meet, and solve their company problems and keep work moving. So I am the chief customer officer and head of enterprise, and uh, our CEO is also a minority male. He's Indian American,
Oh, mhm.
first generation. So second generation, sorry. So we're truly a minority-led company, which I'm very proud of. So
Well, Kevin, I think there's some really cool parts too. Like in the past year, we discovered some things that we didn't really know about, and one of them was that like 60% of all the hotels in America are actually owned by Asian Pacific Islanders. I thought that
correct.
was a unique fact, and that in Texas, it's 80%. It's 80%.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Kevin, how long have you been working at Bisley?
So I joined Bisley in 2019, just prior to the pandemic hitting. And the company was like steamrolling and just plowing ahead with people just coming out of the woodworks to sign up for our software. And then the pandemic hit. So my goal was to be there for a couple of years to help out the CEO, who I was actually coaching and mentoring, and
Oh,
actually was a consultant for a couple of times.
yeah.
My goal was just to come in and kind of help him grow his business, and then kind of transition from startup mode into more of a smaller SMB type business. And so that was what I joined to do. But the pandemic hit, and we encountered a whole bunch of other things that we had to deal with. And so I'm, being a former crisis manager at Hewlett Packard, this is kind of like my wheelhouse. It's like, okay, I took companies through SARS. I took them GBTA through 9/11. I took HP through financial crisis. I can do this, right? So for me, it was really a matter of putting on an older hat and just kind of helping to manage through a current crisis, if you will. But when I look back at my career, I find that I've done so many different things, everything from being a crisis management leader to like strategic sourcing person, procurement person, finance person, marketing person, sales person. So I've had multiple opportunities to kind of like gain some great experiences, but I think the confluence of all of those experiences really helped me to kind of climb the executive ladder, because people recognized my background and my experience. So all of that was very, very helpful. So one thing I would share with folks very openly is, you should never be afraid of gaining a multitude of different experiences, and use those experiences to piggyback into and elevate yourself into a higher role.
Yeah, say yes. Speaking of saying
Yeah.
yes, too, I didn't know our next guest actually does have some experience in the luxury hotel arena. But Kevin, do you mind introducing our next guest?
Yes. So we want to welcome Brent Kobayashi. He has an extremely interesting background, and we were having a preliminary conversation about what he currently does, which I find to be so inspirational. And I'm really glad that somebody like Brent, with his background and experience, has kind of like found his new passion. And so without further ado, Brent Kobayashi.
Here we go, Brian. Here we go.
Hey, there we go. There's the music.
Custom music just for Brent
Just
Kobayashi.
for you, and love that.
There you
background.
go. Thank you.
We gotta send some love to Brent. Brent's got the best background right now.
It does. It definitely does. My Hawaiian flowers don't cut it compared to that.
There you go. There you go. So, no, I'm excited to join the group today. And yes, I grew up in luxury hotels. That was kind of where I started. And working for Four Seasons Hotels for many years. I did a little stint with Ritz-Carlton, Pan Pacific Hotels. So yeah, that's kind of where I grew up.
So Brent and I met at Sound Physician. So he's been working in the medical field, recently, and he's also one of the top either trainers or other things like that. So, Brent, tell me a little bit more about how you became successful in the industry that you're in.
Sure. It's interesting when you ask me that question. I don't know if I feel like I am successful. It's one of those questions. What is success? But I've been very fortunate to work with some incredible organizations, and to me, I think that was important, was to not just to have a job and work for a company, but work for something that really had a purpose and a vision. And even going back to my hotel days, starting with Four Seasons Hotels, just a really strong, purpose-driven, to ensure, that golden rule, treating our guests how we want to be treated, was always the pillar of that of Four Seasons. And that really is almost cultish in a way, right? And that was really important. And that started me off in this whole obsession with service, which I think has helped me throughout my career. Where you're always thinking of, how can we do it better? How can we help someone? What are their expectations and how can we wow them? That type of thing. And so I think growing up has helped me do that. Healthcare as well, and as we know, in the last couple of years has been just healthcare has been crazy. But being involved with some incredible healthcare companies has really helped me to have that passion driven. And I've seen it from different ways. I worked for an assisted living organization, as well as sound physicians like John mentioned, but I'm now with a company called Fast Pace Health, which is really focused on the healthcare in rural communities. Which we know is a challenging. And when you add COVID on top of that, and you add all the crazy things that's happened, it's a strong mission-driven organization. It makes you feel like you want to be there. And I think that's the key to success, is maintaining that passion, going into something. And whether it's something like healthcare, which again is ultimate, maybe it's just making something, but there's a passion or mission around that. I found if I'm able to get that purposefulness around it, it helps to keep me driven, which I think helps me keep successful. I think that's the big thing. So finding that organization that you can partner with and do that.
Hey, Brent, I find the transition, I get the transition. I mean, certainly I've been a fan of all of those luxury brands, and I've had the privilege of staying in a lot of those luxury brands, and actually was on the Four Seasons advisory board at one point. So very familiar with that brand and the service, that quality and levels that are kind of consistent with those brands. But how did you move from like luxury brand hospitality into like a medical field? Like it seems like it's not like a natural transitional path, if you will. So I think the audience would be interested to hear, how did you make that leap of faith,
Well, it's interesting. I even worked for a pawn shop company for a while too. A very successful pawn shop company, and still successful, right?
Wow.
And I've always wanted to write an article from posh to pawn, going from luxury hotels into the pawn shop company, but now it's into healthcare as well. What I find is people are people are people. And again, my focus has always been working in either learning and development, talent development, talent management, and human resources. And so, again, it doesn't matter the industry. That's being in a field like that. It doesn't matter what the industry is. I'm able to, it's people are people. There's always people that are supporting organizations, making things happen. And so, whether it's in a hotel, where really the product is customer service, whether it's in a pawn shop, which is really about providing, options for people that just don't have other options in order to secure small loans, or whether it's, with urgent care or healthcare, in communities that people don't have it. People are people are people. And so I'm able to, help in those ways. Is how do we, ignite the power of the people to do the best that they can do, to really focus on being themselves and being great people as well, not just for the business, but for themselves. So that's kind of how I made the transition, because really I thought I was going to be in the hotel industry for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And then when I kind of said, hey, here's an opportunity to work for a pawn shop company, which was just out of the blue, I thought that's kind of interesting. And once I switched industries, it was really the same. Doing the same thing, different products, different services, different vision, but still the same. And same thing in healthcare. I must say, healthcare is a little crazy. Lots of crazy things going on, but yes, it's still the same principles. That's still the same drive. So
before John asks you the next question, I think it goes without saying you should be commended for your bravery. to kind of follow your heart and jump into new
Yeah.
experiences without abandon, and just putting the best you in front of whatever you're confronting, and just gaining from that experience, and not being afraid to recreate yourself or reinvent yourself for whatever new adventure you decided to undertake. So congratulations to you for that bravery. Most people are not that brave, so good for you. John?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. Brent, I didn't know this Pawn. I love that. Like he could have been the star on Pawn Stars or something. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
I'll take a two-part question. Number one, I just really want to know, like, what's the thing that sold you on the pawn shop, right? Right. Okay. And the second one, though, is that you said, I love that you said this, right? It's people business, right? We're all people. It's people business, and all these other parts. And you did share a little bit about how you grew up, and so I really would love to hear, like, is that basis for that people business. Quite often what we see is that our parents or our relatives are in that people business, and that's when you get the basis of it because you grew up with it. So let's talk about pawns, and then we'll talk about the basis of people.
Yeah, the pawn shop story. Basically, I was a stay-at-home dad when I lived in Austin, Texas, and I was very involved with the local SHRM chapter.
Oh, yeah.
Which I always was. Like, to me, SHRM, ATD, all those are associations. That's always been a passion of mine. Anyhow, long story short, I got connected with someone who was looking for someone to help with their leadership development and talent management. And it was with the pawn shop company. And I thought, really? Pawn shops? But once you get into it and realize what's going on, it was, incredible company, great leadership, still successful today. And just working with a very intelligent, smart leader as well, I jumped at the chance. And so that's kind of how I got into the pawn shop business, I guess you could say. The people side, yes. It's interesting because, being prepared for this talk today, I did have to kind of reflect and look back at how I grew up and my upbringing. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, we always go back to our parents, on the, being the therapist couch, look back at your parents, what happened. And it's interesting, even the conversation I had with Kevin and John just earlier today was, my father was a bit of a trailblazer in some ways, second generation Japanese Canadian, and really was involved in so many organizations, associations, community leader, community advocate, whether it was involved with political campaigns, whether it was being involved with associations and groups. He jumped in there, even though he was in a minority, and he was older. He had me when I was 52, and so he had this whole life of growing up, coming over and being born in Canada in 1915, I think was his birth date or something like that. And so going through a lot of challenges throughout Canada, especially during World War II, with the internment camps. He was fortunate; he did not have to go to an internment camp, but some of his family members were. But again, he was actually even in the army. He was in the Canadian military as a radio officer, being a Japanese Canadian. So I look at him because he kind of was that trailblazer. He's the one that kind of really engaged people. If you met my father, you would not forget meeting him. Yeah. And so it's interesting growing up, with thinking of your parents, like, oh, I don't want to be like my parent, or, I want to be as far away as possible. I look at some of that and how that's rubbed off. And, even the idea of, being Asian really was never a thing for me because for my father, it was never a thing. He never made it an issue. We never had to talk about how I might be treated differently. Because I grew up in a community that was actually founded and was surrounded by Japanese Canadians. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting growing up, which I'm very fortunate for, and very, I don't take it lightly. But again, I think that's where the idea of, the focus on people, and then starting in the hotel industry, again, just that industry of helping to please people and, exceed their expectations and all of that was kind of coupled with that. And then my mother, who is totally opposite to my father. My father was, telling dirty jokes and, getting people together. And, I won't even say some of his regular jokes and almost being offensive in many ways, but, everyone was fine with that. My mother on the opposite was very quiet and demure, but she was also very much that servant leader. Like she was always there to make sure everyone had what they needed. And I see that in myself. And so it's funny, you're always a combination of your parents, but I'm very fortunate. And I think that's why it's kind of led me into that passion for seeing people develop, helping people succeed, and really igniting the energy in people and organizations. So,
Brent, you have such an interesting background, but it's very clear that you're biracial, right? Your dad was Japanese, your mother was German, Swedish, I think you said.
English, yeah, German English.
Yeah, German English. So you, like you said, are a result of a bicultural union of two individuals, and I have a very mixed nuclear family as well. I have multiple, relatives who married, different races and stuff. So there's a bit of like, when you, like for me, being raised in a second generation Japanese American home, the culture part was pretty Japanese, it was pretty Asian. And on top of that, I grew up in Hawaii, which is predominantly Asian cultures anyway. So I had the reverse experience of all of my friends who were born and raised here on the mainland and in Canada. But you're a part of a bicultural family. And I know that there's some struggles there, and there's some like identity crises things that, like kids of biracial couples have to kind of deal with, especially if they're black and white, right? Am I black? Am I white? What am I? I'm a mixture of both. And how did you find any of that complexity or difficulty growing up as a biracial guy?
You know what? And I had thought about this question as well. Not really. and which is interesting. And I think it was because of the community. I grew up in a very small community just outside of Kelowna, in British Columbia. But again, we had so many families. In fact, a city that we're close to, Oyama, was named after a Japanese general in the army. And so it was a community that had the Kobayashi family, we had the Suzuki family, there was all these Japanese Canadian families that were already there. And so it was almost like there wasn't even a thought. So I was very fortunate from that aspect. It's funny, the only time where I had a lot of questioning about my race was when I lived in Japan for a year.
Uh-huh.
And that's where they were confused, because they would look at me and they'd say, okay, your name's Kobayashi, but you don't really look Japanese. Your mannerisms really aren't Japanese. You definitely don't sound Japanese.
Yeah.
And so again, that's where there was a lot of confusion there. And they couldn't understand the idea of having, someone who was brought up in Canada, who was Kobayashi anyhow. But no, like I said, I would, not that I wish there was better stories. It's funny. The only time I ever felt that idea of either a racist comment or something was I was walking in Kelowna and I walked by these two people and they said, oh, look, there's the chopstick factory. And that kind of like, was that a slur against me being Asian? Mm-hmm. I found out there actually was a chopstick factory. I didn't know, but that aside, that's the first time there was a feeling which I have never felt before. It was like, oh my gosh, something has been said to me that I think might have been racist because of being Asian. Mm-hmm. And whether or not, and obviously it wasn't true, there really was a chopstick factory in Kelowna, which I didn't know. But again, that feeling I've never felt, but it wasn't a good feeling, right? It kind of hit me really hard, and I still remember that day today.
Oh, well, let's do this, Brent, since you are in the healthcare field too. And we just talked to Gina Wong and Gina Ko, who both are psychologists, and just talking about the effects, right? The effects of racism and other types of things like this on Asian Pacific Islander mental health. Even for myself, I just recently took a trip to LA and nothing happened. But there is this whole point there because of the traveling. Like I got to go there and I got to think about how much time. It's like, when you go to New York, you got to put your guard up, right? If you don't put your guard up in New York, something bad's going to happen.
Oh yeah.
Eyes down. Yeah.
Right. And for me, I just put my guard up because I was in LA and I just wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen. And so you spend a lot of your time like making sure that you're ready to defend against something if something happens. And again, nothing happened, but I'm just saying there's that toll. And I think the other part, like going back to having the internment happen as part of the Japanese part, I think these things leave these kind of unknown tolls.
Yeah.
And they can happen over generations. I'm just curious, what do you know on on the research side, and what do you personally know on your side?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I can't imagine when, it's funny, recently I've really gotten into looking at the history, and there's a few books about my grandfather and my father as well. And getting involved with, I'm now more aware of it, and again, it's not so much was my experience, but I can't imagine what my father and my father's family went through, being asked to say, you have to leave, here's one suitcase. You can take one suitcase of your belongings, then you're completely moved away, whether it was away from the coast of Vancouver or wherever you were put, into a place that you didn't want to go to. You lost everything. That it hits me now. I really think about that, but it wasn't my experience. But again, it is an impact for sure.
Hmm.
Did your father ever talk to you about that? Like, when I speak to some of my friends whose family was interned, I had one aunt who was interned. Because of the Asian cultural thing, a lot of times they just didn't want to talk about it. Like, it happened, we're moving on, we're not going to talk about it. And so you have this whole new younger generation that's growing up that wants to know more about it, but their grandparents who were subject to it are gone. And so I just think that there's a dearth of cultural identity and knowledge that's basically being glossed over because culturally they did not want to talk about it. Was your family and your father like that too?
He didn't share a lot as a family, and like you said, very much Asian culture. You don't really say a lot, just keep moving on, kind of thing. But my father, like I said, loved to be interviewed, and I just think back of all the times I wish. I went to a college lecture that he gave. Actually, he was asked to come in and kind of share his life story.
Wow!
And in hindsight, I wish we would have recorded it, because I learned things about my father which I knew nothing about. Yeah. So even now, I am out there searching. And again, back then there wasn't a lot on the internet. It's interesting. My grandfather actually kept a diary throughout every day throughout World War II.
Wow.
And my uncle actually, it was written in Japanese. So my uncle's actually had it translated by some students that he worked with, because he's a professor in University of Guelph, I believe. And I want to go and read those transcripts now, because I want to see what that experience is. But
well, check this out. We got this Jolene Jang too, of course, who we hung out with earlier this month. She said that Densho, DENSHO.org, is the authority on Japanese American testimonies. Go check out that website. Brent, we're heading down to our last two questions for you.
Sure.
This one is, you talked about how your parents and your grandparents talked about like being part of the community. I'm just kind of curious, what were some of the things that you did either with your community or in your job to become a successful executive?
Well, community-wise, I would say getting involved, and to me that was through associations, in professional associations, creating those contacts, whether it was, and being in human resources and learning, it was through SHRM and through ATD, and getting very involved with that and creating those connections. I think just being successful and growing up and, in the industry, what I've learned over my years, one thing is the idea of just being curious, always learning. And again, this isn't nothing to do with being Asian, but just, having that learning curiosity, I think has always been something that has helped me grow. But it's also something we're always looking for people. We want people to be curious. How can you do things better? If you don't know how to do something, you're going to go figure it out, or at least kind of figure out how to do it.
Right.
And I think that's changed over the years, because now people have so much access to information.
Yeah.
It's not so much, hey, we're going to teach you how to do a skill. It's now like, hey, we want you to create a website using HTML code. Okay, I've never done that before, but in 30 minutes, I was able to code my first website, right? And not that I can do it all the time, but I was able to do that. So to me, it's that learning curiosity has always been a big thing, because you sometimes can't train that per se, but it's having that mindset. So it's that idea of that growth mindset. Another thing that I've found that's helped me be successful, and this has only been in the last few years actually, is the idea of agile and incremental steps. Yeah. Meaning, because growing up, you think, oh, I want to create this great vision of this incredible training program or this great initiative, whatever it could be. Yes, you want to get there and you want to have that vision, but it's about how do I create these incremental steps to get there? And as I create the steps, how do I keep making it better and better and better as we go? And to me, that was hard for me to figure out because, wanting it to be perfect the first time, and that's hard. And you never get there, right? So the idea is take little steps, go do it, try it. If it fails, if it doesn't work, that's okay. Reinvent it, do it again, figure out a way to make it work. Because at least you're moving forward versus just stand still. So again, those have been, being curious about things and just going out and doing it, getting it done, and reinventing it if you need to I think has helped me be successful and continue to move in different career paths.
I feel like that advice is kind of like your advice to other APIs who kind of aspire to become executives, in whatever career path they choose. It's like being curious and not being afraid to fail and keep moving forward. I think is solid advice. Is there anything else to that you want to add, like to anybody aspiring to move into a senior executive role in your company?
Care about people.
Love that.
I know it's especially in human resources, it's about the people, and care about the people that you work with, the people that you will partner with. It's all about people, right? And then that's the key thing. And you need to come at it at a perspective of how am I impacting another person? How do I care for that? How do I truly care for that person? And that's the only way we're going to get things done, right? And that goes beyond just within business. It's within society, caring for others no matter what. And how do we do that so that we can show that care and be honest, to be vulnerable. And if you don't understand, share that you don't understand. That's, you can't live someone else's experience. So
that is such a great advice to wrap things up. I've always found that my parents taught me very early on that if you care about others and you make decisions that's going to benefit others, not just selfishly focused on yourself, then everybody becomes successful. And what I found throughout my career is it was a passion of mine to always help people, mentor people, and kind of help advance them in whatever they need in order to succeed and stuff. And I get back tenfold from them, whatever effort I put out to help them, and in fact, it feels so much better to be helping them than anything that I could ever do for myself. So I've spent my whole career doing that, and it's such a pleasure to hear you say that, because to me, that is a success to a great career. So thank you for being with us, Brent, today. This is incredible.
Certainly. Thank you for having me.
Brent, I just want to reiterate that part about hospitality. I've been telling people during the pandemic too, especially some of us who are event professionals who got put out of work. And I said, it's the one thing that you can't really have. You have to really earn how to do hospitality. And it's something that's transferable to every single business. So thank you.
Even pawn shops.
Even pawn shops.
I used to say this all the time in the hotel. It was like there's a difference between someone who works in a hotel and someone who's a hotel professional.
That's right.
And that's where the difference is. So
Well, thank you for that. Again, API Event Pros. If you want to join the group, facebook.com/groups, API Event Pros. Join us here. Thanks again, Brent.
Thanks, Brent.
Wow, Kevin, did you ever think, we've been talking about this thing for about a year, and that we're actually finally getting a chance to do this, and we're getting to uncover all these amazing stories?
There's so many more amazing stories, and I really have to thank you for bringing some of these stories to the forefront for people, because the more people hear about these things, the more normalized it becomes. It stops becoming a "what country are you from" type of conversation, which is where we need to go.
That's exactly where we need to go. And speaking of going, right, I think we're going to go to Las Vegas if I got my city right. But I'm so excited. I got to meet this person. She was recently voted one of the top 40 under the age of 40 in the event professional field. But the real hallmark is that I was in Vegas and I said, what event professional wants to hang out and go have lunch or coffee? And she's the one that said yes. And so I just excited that we got to hang out with it. Let's bring up the one and only Tui D.
Ooh, love the dress.
I know, look at that.
Hello.
Good to see
Awesome.
you. And look, you got to check that out, Kevin. Look how many letters she's got past her name. CGSP.
Oh, I know. My God. Yeah.
SEP. Tui Deep, will you just do us a favor and maybe introduce yourself and, of course, tell us what each of those letters mean? I think I know one of them, but not the other two.
Absolutely. And so, hi, John. Nice to meet you, Kevin. I am already loving this conversation. It is so insightful and just so needed right now. And so, 2ED professionally, CGSP, DMCP, CFEP, getting my CMP and my CED
Oh my God.
this year, next year on target. And so certified guest service professional, destination management certified professional, and certified special event professional.
Wow, that's incredible. You know,
Yeah.
Tui, the only person who competes with you is Gary Murakami, who's on this webcast, and I think he has like 5 or 6 designations behind his name. So like he takes up a whole line by himself. So you're almost there. You're just about there, Tui. So
Gary, you're my inspiration. I'm gonna try to get those extra alphabets after my name. At this point, it's just more entertaining for me when people have to, say my name professionally at a networking event, at a speaking engagement. I just find it quite witty at this point.
My goodness. So to do us a favor, tell us who you are and what you're doing, because I think you've changed jobs since the last time I've seen you too.
Absolutely. So the things I do, oh my goodness. So I am a senior experience designer at HOT, which is based in Austin, Texas, but I'm actually working remote in Los Angeles. So I've actually moved since my Vegas days. Yes, I am right by the beach here in Venice Beach. I'm also a co-host for Event Brew podcast, where it's an opinionated podcast about just what's going on in our industry. I also sit on the international committee for DEI for ILEA HQ. I am serving this. Let's see, it ends July 1st. I am past president of the ILEA Los Angeles chapter. So as of in just a couple months after, I believe 8 to 10 years of serving on a board of directors for ILEA, I will have finally done all my volunteer time. And then, of course, something that's near and dear to my heart is serving on the board of directors for Search Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization for event professionals in crisis. So our fellow peers, and it's completely anonymous. And yes, those are all the professional items I do.
Let's just make sure and decode the alphabet soup that we got going on. ILEA, which of course used to be ISIS, which they did a brand changes. For those who don't know what ILEA is, can you help us out?
Absolutely. It is the ILEA, International Live Events Association. So it is just one of the many communities that event professionals can join and not only network and of course do business with, but really get to know these individuals as humans. And business is personal. So being able to create that connection, that sense of belonging that we as humans crave. So absolutely there.
When do you sleep? I just have to ask because you have such a busy life and a lot of obligations. How do you do that?
Absolutely. So I say the word productive. I tend not to say busy anymore because you can be busy but not productive.
Yes.
And so my whole thing is boundaries. In my 20s, I had, I was always saying yes. I was always just sacrificing other aspects of my life. And now my quality of life has enhanced because I'm able to set healthy boundaries with my professional, my relationship, my family, my friends, and my me cup, both mentally and physically. So I'm able to show up the best version I can when I then attend and do the work, do the event prof work there.
How do you, you're like a dream person for this interview because you're a young woman who is Asian, who is in a traditionally non-Asian world, and yet you've managed to accomplish so much, learn so much, experience so much, and then deploy that all back into the industry and actually become a leader yourself. It's like, do you have like any, like what drives you
Mm.
to kind of move forward and, challenge boundaries and the bamboo ceiling, if you will?
I love that, the bamboo ceiling.
Mhm.
Well, growing up in this industry, I was limited on people that looked like me, whether that was a woman or another Asian American. And so something that really fuels that that brings that catalyst into what I do on a day-to-day is I want that for the future generation. If I didn't have someone
Yeah.
that I could truly identify with, then let's be more diverse, and let
Yeah.
me be that person then, and let me for the future generation of event professionals coming up. That's something that's really important. To leave a positive impact on our industry
Mhm.
is what I strive for, and that's really what motivates me on a day-to-day. And so being completely involved in all these associations and growing your network, and it brings me so much joy to connect other people with each other, finding those commonalities, hearing people's stories, and then growing everyone's network. And really, it's all about collaboration in this industry, and you can't do it alone.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Not too much pressure there, but you seem to be handling it really well, Tui. So good for you.
Well, Tui, one of the things is you're coming off of your presidency too. Congratulations, by the way. And again, because that's not easy. If you look at your chapter, there are not that many people who can claim being in that club of being a president. Even I haven't yet done it in my MPI chapter, although it's on my list. I'm really curious about what do you think is some of the things that you did that helped you get into that position, in that position of leadership or other positions of leadership? Because I'd just be curious if you like either have like an example, right? And then, some of those things that you do that are different than other people that help you stand out.
Absolutely. I mean, in a lot of view, it's caring about people. And so
Mhm.
it's just being present to have those opportunities come through, and then being able to then jump on those opportunities. So if it's something that wasn't within my job role, it didn't matter. I was interested in it. If someone reached out for help, I was willing to help with in that. And so I think that's how it all began. I actually attended TISA, the International School of Hospitality, it's ran by Tim Lamb, Marcus Lamb, Donald, and they're all part of the NACE world. And so all my instructors were event professionals. So immediately I was able to grow my network even as a young professional, as a student. My catering instructor was Michelle Pulsey of Caesars, who got director of F&B. And so that's how it all just started. And it wasn't just going to a networking event one time, right? It was going every single month and saying, okay, well, is the registration fee worth the sacrifice? Yes. And I couldn't give anyone any business. I was a student, I was a young professional, but I remembered those that were nice to me, that wanted to have that conversation. And when I became the client, a client of theirs, I really returned that favor and was able to then partner with them. We did a lot of beautiful events together. And that was honestly because I tell them, Gary Boardman was one of them, very first event professional. I said, like, hello, and was curious about me. And I'll always remember that. And so
Oh yeah, too. I think that's something that's important too for BIPOC or anybody of color as they come into these associations, is to make them feel welcome. That usually there's one person that many people will say that made their membership.
Yeah.
And it's the person that reached out when nobody knew them. And so I got to decode the rest of our alphabet. NACE, the National Association of Catering Executives, NACE, N-A-C-E. Joan Eisenstadt has a follow-up question. Was Patty Schock part of your faculty at that time?
absolutely, Patty, the great and wonderful Patty Schock, taught me everything I know about F&B with Michelle Pulsey. She was actually also the first person to nominate me for my industry award. It was Top 22 Millennials with Corporate and Event and Conventions magazine.
Yeah.
And that was back, I believe, in 2012. And so, yes, just love Patty Schock, and just love everyone that really helped support me on my career path there. So, yes.
Hey, Tui, I'm going to ask you something that somebody asked me a long time ago, and it kind of took me by surprise, because I really had to put a lot of thought into it. But, when I was moving up the ranks in our industry, I was the only Asian person there. And um, I felt this tremendous responsibility, and I don't know if you felt the same thing on your ascent in our industry, that you're not just representing yourself, but you're representing other Asian Pacific Islanders, right? And so I put this pressure on myself to not be disrespectful to people, to be kind to people, to be very professional. And it's like, before I moved, I was telling John earlier and Brent in a conversation, I grew up in Hawaii and I had the reverse experience of being in the majority and the white people or the Caucasians were the minority. It was only when I moved to California where the roles were reversed and I realized I'm a minority now. But as I was making my way up, I felt a real consciousness about setting the right example and breaking stereotypes so that other Asians could kind of follow along and also, project themselves upwards, in their organizations. Do you feel that same pressure in all of your endeavors as you were kind of working your way up?
I feel a sense of honor and a sense of gratitude. That's the feeling I get.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that we're able to share our story. I'm half Vietnamese, half Chinese, and I'm actually not, I'm a refugee. So my parents escaped the country in the 80s, had me, I was actually born in Hong Kong.
Wow.
And then we came here. So English is actually my third language. And
Wait, what? Oh, you know the other two then? Yes, right. I got it.
so I learned
Wow.
Vietnamese, Chinese, and then English. And so there was just this, and this was very serendipitous that this event happened because just yesterday I was talking about just the identity of
Mhm.
not being Asian enough when you're in Asia, right?
Yeah.
And being too Asian when you're here in the US. And it's
Yes.
like, well,
Yeah.
what? Then who am I? When I was younger, I see John and Kevin. I wanted to be a Jennifer. I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to fit in. It was really uncomfortable for me to even get to know new people because, oh gosh, when a substitute teacher would come, I would be like, oh gosh, they're gonna just butcher my name constantly. My name is always butchered, which is why I spell it out for people, even on my business card it says parentheses 2ED. But something to share with you all is my name is actually not Tui. That's just my American version of it. It's actually Tui. But
Tweet.
because of
Yes.
the tone, as you know, in Asian culture, it's just the way that you say it can completely change a name. So the only time I even hear Tui is when my mom is yelling at me.
Yeah.
So, so Tui is just always and so there's just a lot of those kind of stories that just, now I love being Tui. I'm the only Tui around, if someone says, oh, I've heard of you, then it's great because then you build that confidence throughout those years, through your stories, through your struggles and challenges to then say, yes, like I am here, I am confident, and I am authentically me. And if I can represent all the things, all the people that can identify with different aspects of me, whether that's being a woman or being an Asian American or being a refugee or first year, our first generation, then that's beautiful. And I want to share in that story with them. We are all so connected and so different. We have different life experiences. And I think that's where my curiosity and love comes in for connecting with one another, is that at the end of the day, we're still the human race. So if I can be morally sound and I can go to bed at night saying I did the best I could and it was the direction and it felt genuinely me, then the rest is piece of cake.
It's really funny you mentioned that about the right pronunciation of the name. And I was lucky because I was given an English name, at birth, but my last name, like your name, has always been butchered by non-Asian people, right? It's so like I would show up at the airlines and like when I was working for the airlines, I'd be on standby and they would always butcher my last name. Passenger Iwamoto, just, and I used to, because you're trying to fit in, right? So it's like, okay, no big deal. You can butcher my name. Just give me my ticket so I can get on the plane, right? But now that I'm older and wiser, theoretically, I now take the time to correct them, saying, no, that's not correct. It's Iwamoto. It's phonetical, so you gain more confidence as you get older. When you're younger, it's kind of like whatever. But when you're older, it's like, oh, no, wait a minute. You're going to say my name? You say it right. you know?
Yeah,
So-
absolutely, absolutely, and that just it comes with that's what when we say representing well is
yeah,
that we're just not going to say your name is your identity, and that's extremely
it totally
important.
is. Yeah.
I had someone yesterday from it was via email, but in Cabo they said Mr. D, and I corrected them. I said yes, I'm my pronouns are
And I'm not a mister.
I'm not a Mr. But yeah,
I love this too, this piece around confidence, right? Too, because I think that's something that's so important to develop this. The other part too, I wanted to try and address with this too is you've won a multitude of awards, and I won a few awards early in my career too, and those are some important things I think that come out that help gain that confidence sometimes for yourself, right? Lots of people are talking imposter syndrome right now, like everyone's worried about, do I have imposter syndrome sometimes around that? And I'm sure agents get a chance to go through that too. I would love to hear, what external and internal things do you think really helped your confidence and that sense of authenticity in yourself?
absolutely. So yeah, going to the awards this year, Biz Bash and Connect named me 40 under 40.
Yes.
Smart Meetings named me Smart Woman in Meetings under a Stellar Performer. I was a woman to watch, and those are all just happened a few months ago. And so the things that keep me grounded and humbled is I was actually on a webinar last week, and we were going around all the winners, and we were saying, what was a big win that you had this year? And of course, people are talking about their accolades within their careers and what their company is doing with sustainability and mental health. And then I got to me, and I said, honestly, my biggest win is my quality of life. Like my quality of life right now is just like I love it, and that's where the boundaries come in
Yeah.
as you grow up in this industry.
Good for
It's
you.
not an honor to say, oh, I'm in the fifth most stressful industry. Oh, I'm extremely busy that I'm not able to sleep. Like, no, that's not the case. I will always make time for people, but I'm very
Yeah.
careful with that time because
Yeah.
especially after the pandemic, my battery runs lower faster, especially at social settings. And I'm an extrovert. And now I'm like, I need to get to bed. It's 8 o'clock.
Oh, I've been that way for decades. I can network a room and lead people to believe that I've networked there for hours, but I'm like 20 minutes, I'm in my room. But people still think I'm out there, circling around. So it's a real technique. I'll teach you. It's really good.
My goodness, we can totally share. That's another thing. I'll just take photos with everyone and
Yeah.
and then I'm like,
And then next thing you know, like my rule is be in the room by 11 o'clock, no later, right? So when it starts to become 10:45, you'll see me heading for the elevator. But everybody still thinks I'm in the room. That's the trick, right? They still think I'm in there networking, but I'm long gone.
I'm all about JOMO. If I know we talk about imposter syndrome, we even talk about FOMO, fear of
Yeah.
missing out. I am like team JOMO, the joy of missing out.
I am with you.
Yes.
High five. I'm with you.
There you go.
It's like I don't feel FOMO at all. It's like
Kevin, before you ask your next question, then too, we haven't done this with anybody. Too, we got to take the selfie with you. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Good. Now I'm going to post it and look like I'm busy. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh my God. And then you'll be sleeping.
I think so. The thing with I personally think, and I really believe this, that awards are very flattering and it's very humbling and stuff. And one can say that they make or break people. But honestly, an award is an award. And for Asian people, I find because Asian cultures don't really allow you to give you the liberty to really talk about yourself a lot or what you've achieved or what you've accomplished. And that's why I've always found awards to be my spokesperson, right? It's like, I don't have to justify what I do or what I did because that award or that recognition does that for me. So without even mentioning it, you can just say, yeah, check out my profile on LinkedIn. It's all there, right? And so you can kind of bypass this whole, oh, well, I won this, I did that, which is very uncomfortable for a lot of Asian folks. But like for somebody like you who's still very young and, like John said, you're winning a lot of awards. It's like, what does it mean to you, personally, to be recognized kind of like a trailblazer in your own right? Does that feel like a lot of pressure for you, or is it like now I have to live up to this designation of this award or recognition that I got, like, because even at my age, I'm still questioning, recognizes me for something. I still question, like, wow, I didn't realize that, people looked at me that way or people felt that way about me. You still have this, I don't know whether that's a cultural Asian doubt thing or whatever, but how do you feel, now that you're starting to get this attention and notoriety and accolade?
Absolutely. So when I was younger in my 20s, honestly, the Vegas community really did put me on a pedestal. And they said, you're going to be like the next thing for our industry. And I was like, yeah, but I'm also human and I've been working really late. And they were like, we don't care. That's the feeling I got. And so I would only just post these highlights. Social media is really big, and it continuously gets big in the way that we communicate. And so I didn't want to talk about the highlights so much. I really wanted to show people more of my story. So I would post, hey, it's great to be at this networking event, but now I'm back in office and I got to work to make this deadline or whatever the case may be. And so it's all about how you want to respond to things. Yes, you could say, wow, this is a lot of pressure. And, it goes back to your inner critic versus your inner cheerleader. And that's something that I talk about often is it can't be one in this living in the same mind as you. It's either your inner critic that's going to be really hard on you, or it's going to be you want your number one fan, which is you. You want your best friend, which is you, to be there to say, hey, you know what, your best looks different today, and that's okay. And hey, you are, like, who told you that? Is that like, are you telling yourself lies? And in those moments of doubt and fear and worry, because in order to be that trailblazer, you have to push boundaries and you have to, go on the path that no one's gone on before.
Yeah.
And that's going to be absolutely terrifying.
It is terrifying. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yet the views are worth it at the end. After that hike where you're lost and you're in, you have no idea where you're heading to. Once you're at the top, you have these spectacular views.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember is to go back down and to bring others up to share that view with you. That's really important.
That's really profound, honestly, because I think one of the things that we deal with growing up culturally as Asians is the fear of failing, right? It's like your parents kind of like beat that into you, like, you have to be successful at all odds, and you have to work harder and you have to do all this stuff, right? And so we kind of like intrinsically take on that cultural pressure, if you will, to kind of like do good, be better, work harder, do all those kind of things. But I really think that, to get those spectacular views, like you just mentioned, you have to be willing to fail. I think even Brent said that earlier, right? It's like, to me, a failure is not a failure. To me, a failure is an added experience, right? That you can leverage and use moving forward, and if you're a good student, you would never make the same mistake twice, right? If you're an idiot, you may, but if you're a good student, you learn from that and you grow from that, and it almost kind of like takes the pressure off of you. Like, it's okay to fail because I learned something from this experience and I can be better because of it. And to your point, Twee, when you're standing at the mountaintop, you can say, I'm here because I failed.
Let me tell you.
I succeeded.
Yes.
I came that. And to me, that view is even more spectacular because you know where you came from. It's not just this constant success ratio. It's success, failure, but you keep moving up the ladder. And then finally, when you get that view, it's spectacular. Right?
I love that. It's kind of like started from the bottom, now we're here.
Yeah.
Quote, and I'm gonna alter that language because I love this conversation. It's so taboo, especially in society, to talk about failure. And Napoleon Hill talks about this. There's permanent failure and there's temporary defeat. In order to be successful, you have to be constantly and so with fail, and the only difference between temporary defeat and permanent failure is the learning lesson. If you can learn from that, then that gets you up. In order to be truly successful, you have to have many of those. Yeah. And again, it goes back to those highlights, right? But in order to be, all the successful people have made lots and lots of mistakes and have grown and learned those lessons. And so if you are, fearful of failure, then there's that opportunity for success is going to be a really horrible journey because
Yeah.
you're going to be doubtful of yourself. And if you make those mistakes with, with confidence and say,
Mhm.
okay, well, I'm never going to make that mistake again, and
Yeah.
let me pivot this. It creates those opportunities. If there's a problem, I always say that's great because it's not a problem, it's a challenge.
That's
And
right.
I'm willing. Yeah, it's the mindset. It really is. It's a
It really
positive
is a
mental
mindset.
attitude in order to get to where we are. We can
Yeah.
be really stressed about the opportunity, or we can be extremely excited to see where we can really jump in and problem solve, who we can bring in to help.
Totally.
Because that's where.
Tui, you're gonna love this. So we're talking about like how do you handle challenges and failure. We just lost power here in Seattle. We were having a windstorm, so there was nothing better, right, than having my entire computer like completely black out on me for this conversation. Going, oh
Happened
no!
to me before.
One of the best parts about this is working together as a team, right? So I just actually private messaged Kevin. Kevin took over, and that's one of the best things, like here in the event industry, right?
Yeah.
Once the train leaves, it keeps going no matter what. But we have ways to cover it. Tui, with your last question here, what advice do you have for other up and coming APIs, right? And I love too that you've been winning awards like in the 40 under 40 and millennial and other type of awards like that. I think, unfortunately, your advice is way more relevant than Kevin and I advice.
Yeah.
But what would you tell the up and coming APIs who want to become executives?
I would say be authentically who you are because we need you.
Brilliant.
Be authentically, genuinely show up
Yeah.
as who you are because every experiences that you've had in life can really drive our industry forward. And
Yeah.
that's so important. We don't need other people becoming other people because other people want them to be this version. That's so confusing. If you can find your people, the people that can support you and bring, and again, it goes back to just being able to create that community.
Yeah.
And reach out and say, hey, I would love to connect because I
Mhm.
saw you here or there. So many of my network has just been because of those little moments. And so I really encourage you to be involved in the industry, to reach out. Don't be scared. Especially because I was a young professional. And so I can relate. I can empathize. And so I really encourage those to come with their stories and to be who they are, knowing that there's so much growth and change that is going to happen and finding a support system to get everyone where they are. If there's a win-win situation in every situation. So if you can find that, then that will take you very far.
That's great advice. And thank you for spending your time and sharing your wisdom with us today, Tweet.
Of course. Thank you so much, Kevin and John, for the opportunity. And I can't wait to hear who's up next.
Oh, good. Stick around.
Stick around. Thank you, Tui. And I'm actually going to be back in LA, so I hope you are open to another hangout. So I'd love to see you.
I'll be upset if you didn't reach out to me again when you're in LA. We'll go grab some Korean barbecue in K-Town.
Oh, I want to join that.
Come on, Kevin. You're welcome to. Anyone on
I'm always down for Korean barbecue.
Yeah, we'll get the meat sweats. So it'll be great.
Excellent. Thank you, Tui.
Thanks, Tui.
All right, let's see. Joan said, "Oh, did you get a message to your phone to take shelter?" Well, not yet. I'm trying to look out the windows, but you know what, Kevin? Not even a storm will stop this conversation, and we have so much redundancy. We have so many people here from across the world and the country here, and of course, this next guest is really the most important one because you know what, Kevin, it's you.
Oh, how kind. I was thinking, oh, this is exciting. Who's coming up? Oh, it's me.
It is. Well, it is exciting, right? So, Kevin, and it's so funny that a lot of us in Asian cultures too, we use self-deprecation a lot of times as a strategy, right? And there are times I think when it's useful, and then there's times when it's not. Like the funny part is that we've created something in our virtual meetings called the No Sorry Zone.
Oh.
In April of 2020, we just got like tired of people apologizing for things they had no control over, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Blogs, Gardner, whatever, all these other types of things. So, anyways, I think what I loved too in your conversation with Tui was that uh, being confident about your own culture, being confident about who you are with that. So Kevin, what was kind of your path to becoming an executive?
I think for me it was really when I realized that it was okay to fail, that I didn't have to be, excellent in everything that I did, but I would absorb those experiences and kind of carry them with me into my next role or whatever path I decided I wanted to follow. And as a result, like now when I look back at my career path, I've worked for some really great companies. I've worked for Northwest Airlines. I've worked for the Walt Disney Company. I worked for Hewlett Packard. And then I left the corporate side to join the technology side of the meetings and events world. So I actually started in the business travel world and moved into the as a supplier and a buyer, and then moved into the meetings and events world where I had to basically start all over again and recreate myself, my reputation, my network, and a whole new set of experiences. And I remember when I took my first job on the meetings and events side, I was just leaving Hewlett Packard, and I had a written offer to join a very big bank as their vice president of travel and meetings. It was a very coveted role. There were like 1,000 applicants, and I was the one selected out of 1,000 to take that vice president role. And I was this close to taking that role. And one of my suppliers at Hewlett Packard at that time was Starsight. I think many on the call remember Starsight. And they were one of my preferred suppliers. And the president or CEO of Starsight asked me to fly to Philadelphia and meet him for dinner.
Mm.
And he said that, I know you have a job offer and I know that you're probably wanting to take it, but before you take that offer, I would really like to talk to you about possibly taking a role here at Starsight. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to go from buyer to supplier, not going to happen, right? I kind of like being a buyer, not a supplier.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, what the heck, I get a free ticket to Philly and a nice dinner, and I love this guy. He was a brilliant CEO and stuff. I had forgotten though that he was a really good salesperson. So I went to this dinner, and after a few glasses of wine, he started pitching me, and I thought, oh, here comes the pitch. And I'll be darned if in the first 20 minutes he actually got me doubting my decision to move forward with the bank job. And I thought, this is not going where I think it's going to go. So he totally put me out in left field, but he really gave me a lot to think about. And when I look back at that, I'm looking back at that was a really pivotal career moment for me, because I literally changed careers.
Yeah.
And started over again. But it was an executive role, right, which I wanted. And it was the ability to do the kind of things that he had done his research about me. Like in his pitch, he said, you like to help people. You like to train people. You like to, think of this job as, I'm going to pay you to go help your industry friends get better at what they do. And I thought, wow, he says, and because I don't know this industry very well, I come from the venture capitalist world. He goes, I'm in the face of our company, especially to this industry. And I thought, wow, so by the time I left, I went from no way, Jose, to, wow, maybe I ought to seriously consider that, so I weighed all the pros and cons, but now looking back at it, I had a great career in business travel, but I had an equally great career in meetings and events. And if I didn't take that challenge to do something different, to be bold, to not be afraid to fail, I wouldn't have had the second chance at a career in the meetings and events world. And so it's really getting out of your comfort zone and really being brave, if you will, to say, I may fail spectacularly at this, or I may be successful. But either way, this is an experience that I need to have, because it's only going to make me more valuable for my next job. And one of the best advice I ever got from a former mentor of mine was, use your current role to prepare you for your next one.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Right.
And I always remember that. So even if I was doing something totally new, like the first time I took on marketing, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I learned You learn different skills that help benefit. Like now I'm glad I had that marketing background, because in my current role, I'm having to step in and do marketing. We're a startup, so everybody has multiple roles they have to fulfill. If I did not have that marketing background, I would be less valuable to our CEO, right? So
Right.
it's all about taking all of that, applying it to yourself and growing from it. And that makes you infinitely more valuable to your next employer.
I think that's something you always think about, which is kind of hard, I think, also in the API executive part. We're always working harder to be more valuable, right? Again, a lot of people have talked about education here, right? There's a second part of this game, though, and I think we should really talk about it, Kevin, is that despite, you can always be the smartest person in the room. And to get to an executive, I think there's this other thing. So, for instance, my executive coach, who actually made it in Honeywell, right, in the what is it, government contracting, aerospace division, he just really said that, like, you really need to know your boss's boss, you need to know your boss's boss, and at least one people, like, to the side. And you got to get them all to vouch for you if you're going to get to the next stage. That's kind of, one of the things that he taught me. So, which in one way has almost nothing to do with your skill. So I don't know, Kevin, what else are some of the things that you had to discover that helped you get promoted besides just increasing your own personal value?
So another thing that I discovered along my journey is there are some people who are really great at managing up.
Yep.
And there are some people who are really great at managing down. And if you really want to be a leader that everybody wants to follow because they believe in you and they feel that you get them, you see them, you need to be able to do both. And so I've had to learn how to manage up as well as to manage down and set the example, for others that may follow after you. That, you can't, without the people that you're managing down to, it doesn't matter who you are up there, it's going to collapse and fail. So you need each other. And I remember I was having a conversation when I was at HP with my boss, and we had a new CEO come in, and his philosophy was very different from what I just said. He believed that the only people that mattered in the company was anybody who was director level or above. Everybody below was expendable. He really believed that. And remember, when I joined HP, everybody was the same. It was an egalitarian. That was one of the things that attracted me to join HP, was that whether you're a janitor or whether you're a C-level executive, you're equally as valuable to the whole chain of command and execution of those commands. And everybody had a role and a part to play, and you had to respect each other and support one another. So that's the culture I bought into. When that culture changed to, if you're below director, you don't matter anymore, so I'm only going to take care of this level and above, that's when I knew I had to leave, because that was so not me. I cared equally, if not more, for the people that I was managing.
Right.
Probably more than I cared for the ones that I was managing up to. So, but I will tell you what happened. I got a reputation for, being a leader that people wanted to follow. Like, wherever I went, people, no matter what vocation they were in, would always contact me and say, if you ever need me, please hire me. I want to come work with you. To me, that's the ultimate validation that you've done your job as a leader to inspire people and to motivate them. So
I think it's really a key skill in terms of that leadership part, and people willing to follow you, because there's the proclaimed leadership, right, and then there's the earned leadership. Mm-hmm. I think those are really important things. I've actually built a team building scenario which I haven't ever gotten to play out, but basically everyone starts in a group, right, and then at the end of every round, everyone does two parts. Every employee says, I want to work for you as a leader, or I don't want to work for you as a leader. And then every leader gets to say, I want to keep you or I want to fire you. And then anyone who goes into any of those parts, goes back into a pool, and the other teams can rehire them. And at the end of the game, it's who's actually managing the most people, which should be the combination of people, I want to work for you as a leader, and the leader says, I want to actually work for you. Sounds simple, but I think the game would get very complex, right?
Well, and it's really, bottom line is this: if you're in a leadership role, and you want people to follow you, and you have to set the example. I talk about leadership a lot. I studied leadership at Wharton School of Business, and I would get into these heavy discussions with my leadership professor who I love and respect. He's written books about leadership, but we got into this whole, are leaders born that way, or can they learn to be a leader? And he was of the opinion that anybody can be a leader. And I was of the opinion, no, I think you have to have a certain level of genes, DNA, because natural leaders don't get a lot of training. They just are who they are, and
Right.
people follow them, for whatever reason, whatever chords are resonating with them, they strike those chords with those people. And that's something that, yeah, you could learn it. I mean, I won't deny that you can learn stuff, but the real true, what I call inspirational leaders, they were born, they weren't trained. Mother Teresa was not trained, but she was an inspirational leader. And so I do believe you have to, maybe it's a perfect combination of both. You have to have the gene, but you also are a product of your environment, and you learn certain things that are appealing to other people. But I think the golden rule always applies. You have to respect people if you want them to respect you, and you have to care about other people. It's like the leaders who only care about themselves and their career trajectory, and they may get to the top, but I will guarantee you that top that they're looking down from, it's very lonely.
Yep, and usually there's some fall that might be associated with it later. That just seems to catch up, right?
Yeah, and that's why I'm excited for, our next guest. I think our next guest is David Kong, because he's somebody that I respect and I admire so greatly, and he is really a true API leader. I mean, he is just, he treats his people well. He respects everyone. He's not loud and braggadocious. He's just very, calm and very mature. And just, to me, that's, I'm sure David had a lot of leadership training stuff, but I also think a big part of his appeal is his story, which I know we're going to come to, in a few minutes, but I can't wait for that conversation.
Well, Kevin, let's not wait. Let's bring on David, all right?
All right, great.
Here come on, David Kong. Hey, David, how are you?
Good. Good to see all of you.
Good to see you, David.
So I got to compliment David on his background. Look at these genius things here. He's got an ultimate of books. I think that's a German beer stein, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did pick up a few things along the way.
Well, Kevin, why don't you do this intro, right? Kevin knows David quite well. So Kevin, do you mind just doing a short intro for David?
Sure. David Kampf was retired just recently. He retired the end of last year, but he spent many years doing some really critical periods of growth and expansion strategy for Best Western hotels and resorts. And David has a very interesting story. I don't want to steal his thunder, but he truly started at the bottom and worked his way up into the CEO role. I will say very proudly that David and I are both alumni association board members for the School of Travel Industry Management at the University of Hawaii. So David and I are both graduates and alumni, at different years, of course, in graduating, but we both are alumni of that university, and we both currently sit on the Alumni Association board for the University of Hawaii TIM school. So with that, David, I mean, nobody can share your story better than you from your dishwasher days. So
Aloha, David.
Aloha. Well, I'm from Hong Kong originally. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. My parents escaped communism in the late 1940s and went to Hong Kong and started a family. And that's where my three brothers and I were born and raised. And my parents had one goal in life, which is to send their kids abroad and further their education and build a better life for themselves, and they were very successful at that. All my brothers do extremely well. I came to Hawaii to go to University of Hawaii, and I came with nothing, no money, no connection, and no way back because it was a one-way ticket. And I had to take a job as a dishwasher and busboy, and that's how I started. And after I worked as a busboy for a while, the maitre d' took a liking to me and made me a waiter. And from that point on, I built my career. And I was listening to Kevin talk about taking chances and broadening the horizon earlier, and I totally agree. with him on that. If you look at my career, some of the inflection points were, for example, I was general manager at Hyatt, a company that I worked for 19 some years. I was general manager for one of the very big hotels, and I got a call from the corporate office and wanted me to go in and lead the business process reengineering efforts. This was in the early 1990s, and who's even heard of that term? Even now, not too many people have heard of that term. So that's a job I was responsible for. I took a risk and went to the corporate office and did that for 3 years. And then I was told to go into sales and marketing and help Hyatt set up the database marketing capabilities. And at that time, nobody even knew what that meant. This was in the mid 1990s. And from that point on, I launched Hyatt.com. I got into electronic distribution. I got into a lot of areas that I wouldn't have otherwise gone into if I was a hotel general manager.
Yeah.
But all those things set me up for the next phase of my career. I left Hyatt and became a consultant with KPMG. And I did that for a year because of all the skill sets I amassed along the way. Not just a hotel general manager, but rather someone who was well-versed in a lot of different areas. And from that point on, I went to work for Best Western, and I was able to leverage all the competencies I was able to amass along the way and leveraged it into the role of CEO. And I did that for 17 and a half years. So I totally agree with Kevin. If you want to build a career, you've got to take chances and you've got to broaden your horizon.
The KPMG, Hyatt, right? So many different experiences around here. David, I would love to share a little bit more, maybe back, your growing up or history, things that were formidable to you in those times, right? Like Brent was talking earlier about not only his parents, but his grandparents that might have helped out. Did any of them give you experiences, of course, that you used going on in your career?
Oh, for sure. My grandmother basically raised us because my parents worked really hard. They both of them worked from morning till night, 6.5 days a week, and it was my grandmother. And you talked about Kevin. You talked about Mother Teresa earlier. To me, my grandmother has always been a saint. I mean, for what she had to do to bring up 4 boys, and it's just remarkable. So she had an impact on me. She's always kind, always compassionate. And then my parents, they were extraordinarily generous people, and they were always helpful and supportive to their friends. And from a long time ago, I learned to do that too, being kind and compassionate and being helpful and respectful also. I think all those good qualities came from the upbringing. And of course, watching them work around the clock, trying to build a better future for us, and made a lot of sacrifices, sent us abroad. Also taught me the value of work ethic and dedication and loyalty towards the family. All those are just tremendous qualities that I was fortunate to gather from my parents and my grandmother.
Yeah. Did you, David, I've always wondered, and you and I, we've had multiple conversations, but I don't think we've ever discussed this, but have you, in your own personal experience, moving up your career ladder, experienced any kind of overt discrimination or kind of like uncomfortable situations because in your case, you're an Asian person from Asia, you're not even like an Asian American, like first, second, third generation. You actually came from, Hong Kong. So in your long career, have you had moments of those things, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I've faced plenty of situations where there was discrimination, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I mean, building my career in Hawaii in the early 70s, if you're not a European or blonde hair, blue eyes, 6'5" or something, you aren't going to get to the top positions. So, that's in Hawaii. I mean, of all places.
Yeah, of all places.
You think it's such a melting pot of different ethnicity. So that's even in Hawaii. And going to the mainland, that's, there are many situations where I confronted that. People making senseless jokes and making comments that are highly inappropriate. But I've learned to just shrug it off because if I was to get upset over it, it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
I choose to ignore those things and not let them bother me. But I would like to point out that sometimes, because of circumstances or whatever, things don't work out, and you have to learn to move on. If you're trying to build a career with a company that don't value you for whatever reason,
Yeah.
and it's certainly easy to blame it on the fact that we are Asian. Maybe it's time to move on.
Yeah.
Life is too short.
I've never and David, you know my background. I grew up in Hawaii, so I was always part of the majority. So I had a totally different growing up experience, especially in high school. I was telling Brent and John earlier, in my high school days, instead of like, bully the Asian type of thing, it was like, it's like beat up the Caucasian day type of thing. It was completely opposite. So when I moved to the mainland, I encountered the complete opposite. When my Asian American friends up here who were born and raised here, a different experience. And so for me, I kind of always had a blind eye to any kind of discrimination, whether it was overt or whether it was subliminal or whatever. And it was only as I got older that I stopped to really take a good look around that I realized, wow, this is actually happening. I guess I missed it for all those years. And maybe that was a blessing because it didn't distract me from trying to move forward in my career. But now that I'm older and I notice it is, which is probably why I'm more active now with DEI causes and API causes. But it really, upsets me. And I want to try to do my part to try to give back to the community that's been so great to me. What are you finding now that you're retired and you've got more time theoretically than when you were CEO of Best Western and putting out fires? What are you? Are you thinking about any API causes or maybe trying to help other, the younger API generations to kind of move up and have a career like you had?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the industry has been so good to me. It's enabled me to provide for my family and find fulfillment in what I do. And it's enabled me to dream boldly about my future and be empowered to pursue those dreams. So I'm intent on giving back. So I'm in the process of forming a nonprofit, but I've already started to work on DEI, which diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I see so many opportunities to offer assistance and support to minority groups, women, Asian groups, and other ethnicity. And there's just so many opportunities. You nailed it on the head when you say Asians have 200% of the average of higher education, and yet only 50% of the executive leadership roles. I mean, if you take out the technology segment, that number would be tiny.
Yeah.
So it's just mind-boggling why that is the case.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can chalk it up to maybe there's conscious or unconscious bias, but sometimes it's how we Asians should try to learn how to be successful in America, in this culture.
So yeah, that's a good one. I would love to see if you have any stories like this. So my early days were at Microsoft, and one of the things that we did, I was started out as a software design engineer in test, and one of the strategies for me in terms of starting to make a difference there was, I think I got the advice is just saying, how can you help others? And so in one system, I did tear apart a system and it found that it was really actually inefficient. But then I started to share it. And what I ended up doing was building a test group. And it was a group that went across organizations. So from the early on places, I was always trying to do cross-team collaboration. So we brought in test leaders from it, and then shared what we discovered about the system and what we did to fix it with other people and going beyond that. And so that, to me, was one of the things that helped me get accelerated through the early stages at Microsoft. I'm curious, what were some of the things that you did maybe early on in your career or later on to get into the CEO level at Best Western?
I like what Kevin said earlier about managing up and managing down. I think that's really important. I think first and foremost, you've got to bring value to the table in order to be recognized. If you're not good at what you do, then there's no way you can move up. I mean, you can have an entitlement mentality, but nobody likes that, and it wouldn't be fair. And you can't make it in the long run anyway if you don't have the good foundation. So I think you have to be a successful individual contributor. First and foremost, if you're not good at what you do, find ways to improve what you're doing and improve your skill set and get more exposure from an experience standpoint. And I think once you've been able to do that, then it's about networking the organization. It's about establishing a name, building a brand for yourself. And then also having champions and advocates and mentors that would support you when the opportunity does knock. And just for you to be recognized. I think we Asians lack in this area a lot. And I remember the earlier days because of my typical Asian upbringing. It's always about heads down, work hard, do a good job, and your future will take care of itself. But it's not the case.
That's not
in
the
this
case.
country. It's not the case. You've got to work hard to not just do a good job, but you have to build a network that would be helpful to you in your career aspirations. And that's not easy for us. It doesn't come easily for us.
That's why I said earlier, David, that for me, I let the awards and recognition, not that I really feel like it validates me, but I just feel like that says what I do for me, and I don't have to talk about it because I'm a typical Asian in the sense where I'm great talking with others about others, but not with me. And I know that you're very much the same way yourself, David, but it's more like getting that to talk for you so that you don't have to talk about it. I've always felt that way, and like you, we both actually been very blessed by industry recognition, but quite bluntly, the people like you and people like me are very rare at the most senior levels in our industry, and when you retired, it was very heartbreaking for me because you were a trailblazer and you were the only API CEO in the hospitality industry. And when you left it just left a big void, so.
It's kind of you to say that. And I was just going to add that, I've been CEO for 17 and a half years. I've been on a lot of industry CEO panels. And it seems like every show you go to on these panels, I'm the lone Asian.
Yes.
I'm the lone minority.
So, look, we got 100% here. We're like breaking the mold, David, right now.
My whole career has been
So obviously that's not right. We need to change it.
That's why I was so excited when I first met you. It's like, there's another Asian. We're going to be friends for life. And then I found out that we both graduated from UH. So I thought, oh, yeah, this is a friendship that was meant to be. But so I'm interested in how this role of CEO came to you, or was it something that you went after? Because like most Asians, when you have an opportunity to go for a big role like that, most of us tend to kind of like, no, I'm never going to get that role, so I'm not even going to put in for a type of thing. Like, what was that experience for you? Was that something they offered you, or was that something you raised your hand and said, I want to put my name in for consideration, or what?
Well, at the time, I felt like it's the right time for me. I've made a lot of contributions, and all the departments and divisions that I've overseen, they've all had breakthrough results. And I thought, I'm now ready for the position. So I raised my hand. And I was saying earlier, you've got to be a good individual contributor, and you've got to surround yourself with a good network of supporters and advocates and champions. I had done that. I have a great track record. And out of 7 board directors, at least 4 or 5 of them were staunch supporters of me. They were my advocates. So when the time comes and the board has to make a decision about different candidates, I was the obvious choice. I made it very easy for them to pick me.
I love it.
So
Yeah, I'm the
this is
choice.
why
Love that.
this is why I say you've got to spend time and build your network and find your advocates and find your mentors.
Totally.
And I don't know, I know we're talking people, right? But there are times when I know when I was at Microsoft, there were times which felt like wasting time, but I knew that I needed to invest this time to build the relationship. I don't know if you felt that way. I don't know if it's something in part of our culture or part of who we are, but there were definitely times where you just need to spend that time with the certain right people if you want to ascend. Does that sound about right?
I think you're absolutely right. And I'm not like Kevin. Kevin is a very social extrovert. I'm almost the opposite. I tend to be quiet and I enjoy conversation in smaller groups, not big groups. It's an effort. But John, really, honestly, whatever we're weak at, we have to make sure we don't let that weakness sink us.
Yeah.
You have to make improvements to your weakness so it doesn't sink you.
Yeah.
And I knew that's something that I had to work on, and also leverage my strength, which was what got me into the achievements of many breakthrough results. And I leverage my strength fully, but I also work on my weakness and make sure that that I don't suffer as a result of that.
And when you say work on your weakness, are you saying like be a little more extroverted or push yourself to like go to a large event, or is it something like that? I'm just curious what you personally did.
Well, actually, I made it a point to do things that I'm not comfortable with. And Kevin said this earlier, whether it's taking a new role or branching into new areas where you can broaden your horizon. But it's more than just work experience. You're working on a skill. I think being social is a skill. Learning how to make small talk and make other people feel important around you. That's a skill. And you can learn that. And you can acquire that. And so I worked on that. And so I didn't let that weakness of mine sink me.
I think that's so profound, David, because I think if you really are going to be an effective leader, you have to surround yourself with people that you trust and people that you're not intimidated by, right? Like you always believe that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. So it's really accepting the fact that, you can't be successful without other people. And I learned that very early on, that my network and my support system is what made me successful. It wasn't just me. I mean, I was just there at the right place at the right time, but I also had to work on myself, my skills, and then what I was weak in, I could surround myself with people who are good at stuff like that, good at things that I'm weak at. But it takes an honest look at yourself to kind of say, I'm not good at this, or I'm good at this, but I'm not great at that. And how do I fix that? Or how do I address that? And, to me, that just makes for a better leader. Like, I think you're such a legendary leader at Best Western because you managed up well, but you also managed down very well. Like your people really loved you and they really respect you and they followed you, like they believed you. But I think a big part of that was they saw in you what you went through climbing, the ladder to the CEO role, And so for you, it was like this self-awareness journey of, I have to fix this or I have to work on this because I'm not naturally good at this. And that's a tough thing for Asian people to come to grips with, right? You're taught to just put your head down, work hard, and everything will be fine. And that's not the truth.
That's not the truth. And just to summarize what we're talking about, so I think there are three parts to three factors that would contribute to anyone's success. It's number one is the individual contribution, your track record. I think that's one that's really important. That's the price of entry. Number two is your own brand. How do people think about you? And you talk about managing down and managing up. If you don't have a good, solid personal brand, you can't get ahead either way. You're not going to be ahead. Number three is a network. So, I don't know how many people in the audience feel this way. Sometimes when we are at the meeting, we say something and nobody seems to pay any attention to it. And moments later, somebody offer the same idea, and everyone thinks it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you want to do yourself. Wasn't it what I just said? What happened? Well, if that happened to you, I suggest you take a look at your network. I mean, how have you built your relationship with those sitting around the table?
Yeah.
Why aren't they paying enough attention to you?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So, David, you're just such a wealth of information. We could go on forever, but what would be your advice to our API audience members who want to move into a role like you had at Best Western or at another hospitality firm or whatever vertical they're working in? What would be some takeaway advice that you would give them on how to achieve that goal?
The three factors that I talked about, being an individual contributor and establishing your own track record, that goes without saying.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to understand.
Yeah.
The networking, I think it's really easy to understand also. The personal brand one is the one that I think we need to pause and think about.
Yeah.
If we were to pass someday, how would people remember us? What are the top three adjectives they would use to describe us? Yeah. And then you ask yourself if that's what you want. You gave the example of Mother Teresa, so I'll just give you this little story to think about. Some years ago, I attended a training session on this personal brand, and the consultant talked about Mother Teresa, and he gave an example. He showed three pictures. The first picture, this is some years ago, was Paris Hilton. And he asked the audience what they thought of Paris Hilton. And of course, all kinds of unsavory adjectives like she's clueless and self-centered and blah, blah, blah. And then he showed a picture of Mother Teresa, and everyone just talked about her being kind and compassionate and selfless and dedicated and so on and so forth. And he made a point, Paris Hilton spending millions on public relations could not change people's mind about her. People have a certain perception of her. You can't change it because that's her personal brand. That's what she's known for.
That's right.
Mother Teresa didn't have to spend a dime.
Right.
And people have the utmost respect and love for her. So the third picture was actually a blank one. And he said, that's you. Now you think about this. How would you like to be remembered? What would people say about you?
Yeah.
And I think that was something that I always kept in mind. How would I like to be remembered? I said earlier that I was fortunate to have tremendous parents and a tremendous selfless, dedicated grandmother. They instilled in me the right values. And I think at the end of the day, if I want to be known as, the adjectives I want to be known for is being kind and compassionate above all else. I don't want to be the smartest guy. I don't want to be known as the smartest guy in the room. I don't want to be known necessarily as the hardest working guy. I just want to be known to be kind and compassionate.
Yeah, that's very inspiring and true to your word. You are that is how people describe you. And I wrote a book about personal brand, so I know exactly what you're talking about. You are what your brand represents, and like I always tell people, like how Jeff Bezos defines personal brand is, it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's your personal brand. And if it's not, if it's unsavory, you got some work to do. If it's like Mother Teresa, then you've done a really good job building your personal brand. So thank you for that wisdom and that advice, David. That's so valuable.
David, I want to sneak one more question in from our resident amazing ally, Joan Eisenstadt. And she said, what roles do allies play in helping to promote our Asian Pacific Islander colleagues?
When you say allies, help me understand what that means.
Non-Asian.
Yeah, most likely non-Asian, right? But supportive to the cause, basically. And so
tremendous, because it's kind of like if I was to toot my own horn, it's not very credible.
Right.
But if other people around me was tooting my horn, then it's extremely powerful.
Exactly.
So it's the same thing. We can say how life is unfair and we're being shortchanged here and there and it's so unjust. It doesn't resonate as well as if somebody else chimed in.
That's right. Yeah. And I also think being Asian, we kind of leverage that, right? It's like I found out early on that I don't want to talk about me, but other people do. You're welcome to do it, but I don't want to do it. So please do it for me. And a lot of them willingly jump into that. So it kind of works well that way, I think, you know. But all right. Well, thank you again, David, for this invaluable conversation. I really appreciate you taking time out of your solace and retirement to come back to the industry a little bit and share some of your wisdom and experiences with everyone. I know everyone on this call and who watches this will just get so much from what you shared. So thank you for that. I really
Yeah, well, thank you, Kevin and John, for having me. And I want to thank everyone that's on this call for attending the call, because you're doing something about the situation that we all feel we don't feel very good about. And the fact that you're taking time to do something is a very constructive and positive step. So I applaud you for doing that. It's great to be with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. Brent Kobayashi said, so honored to be on this call with David Kong. Thanks.
I think we all feel that way.
Yeah, thank you.
Mahalo.
Thank you.
Wow, Kevin. Well, we're getting close to our end at 2 hours here. We're going to invite some of our guests if they want to come and join in and do some commentary. But I thought I'd kind of reflect on some of the pieces here. Kevin, what a great conversations. I do want to share this one story I think that's really important to share before our time's up. And, you know, it was great to hear so many executives' inspirations come from their family and their upbringing.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important part. And mine comes from a paper son. So let me just check, Kevin. Kevin, do you know what a paper son is?
I do, because you told me what it is. Fascinating.
Right, I'm like the ultimate educator in this thing.
Yeah, please share that story. I think it's valuable. So.
Because 99% of the people and 99% of Asian Pacific Islanders actually don't know this story. So basically, Paper Sun stemmed from something that was important. In 1882 was the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? And so America actually thought too many Chinese were coming in and taking all the jobs. It was from the time of the railroads. So they actually passed legislation, right? So when I look at all the current events around immigration, I always just said that you know what, this is not new. This has been happening for years, right? Go do your history. Anyways, in 1882, they started doing this. So that means I think it was limited to like something like 160, when basically thousands of people were coming in and they were doing things like building the railroads and doing other important jobs and also dangerous jobs. Anyways, this limited the number of jobs, but there was a loophole in the law. And the loophole in the law says that if you're the son of a merchant, of a business person, right, you're actually a naturalized citizen. So in 1906, in San Francisco, the earthquake comes out, and it's not the earthquake, it cracks the gas lines, it burns the whole town down, because everything's built so close in San Francisco. It burns everything, and including the courthouse. The courthouse, of course, contains
the paperwork.
the birth records.
The birth records, yeah.
So after the fire died down, they came out and they asked everybody inside the city, and they said, if you had a son born here, just come by the courthouse and we'll write you a new birth certificate. So every Chinese guy's like, yeah, I got 5 sons, right? Yeah, I got 6 sons. And so that's why they're called paper sons. They never existed. And we've even taught this to like 8th grade kids who start to ask the question and going, was that right? And some kids were like, well, technically that's illegal, so it gets against the law. And the other kids were like, well, it was a workaround for a really bad law. So does that help make it right? And so they kind of got the notion for it. Anyways, these got sold to the black market for about $100 per year of birth. So I think my uncle was 20 years when he bought one. It cost $2,000 of 1912 money.
A lot of money back then.
He was actually adopted, right? And so his uncle, who was overseeing him, sold 1/3 of his farm.
Wow.
To pay $2,000 to gamble basically on my grandfather. And this is kind of cool. I love that all the execs here said, take risks.
Yeah.
Because he
You're
could
not going to be successful if you don't take risks. I'm sorry. It doesn't work that way. It's like, think of it as gambling, because, you know, again, not to feed a stereotype, but Asians supposedly love gambling. Right? But you're never going to win the big jackpot if you don't keep feeding the machine. You know what I mean? And some are going to tank and some are going to hit, but if you really want to hit the big one, you're going to have to keep putting in the coins, you know, and that's what it is.
As I gotten older, like I take calculated risks, right? And sometimes, like for me, at work, I look for places where no matter what happens, I win. So I can take a risk, right, with almost no downside. Those are things that I actually have taught myself to look for. Anyway, so my grandfather comes in here, and now he's got to go across. And basically what you get is you get a birth certificate, you get a book, and you get a third-class ticket. The book has information about your fictitious family. Because, of course, Immigration Service in America caught wind of this, and if they find out that you're cheating, right, they're going to deport you. Right. And then the second part was the third class ticket is in the steerage. You're basically traveling with the animals 3 months from China to America. And if you don't get dysentery or die from the unsafe conditions, right, you gotta figure out how to survive this 3-month trip. So you go all the way to the west, and let's see, Kevin, you've been to San Francisco, right?
Yeah, I live in the Bay Area, so.
Oh yeah, so you've been to Alcatraz Island?
Yes.
But then have you been to Angel Island?
Yes, I have actually.
You're one of the few, because Angel Island is the Ellis Island of the West.
It's the Ellis Island of the West, yeah. Mhm.
Yep, and so you're going to go there, and that's where INS will test you and figure out if you're cheating or not and let you into the country or deport you. But 3 days as you come to there, all the Chinese people on the boat will come in here and get onto the the deck of the boat, and they would all ceremoniously throw their books into the ocean. Because number one, you can't get caught with it, right? And number two, now you have to sit here and memorize all this information about
Oh
your
God.
family. This is stuff you don't even remember about your own house, Kevin.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many steps from the first to second floor? How many windows on the west side of the wall? Where's your
And don't forget, it's in English. It's not in Chinese. So they have to, you're studying and retaining a foreign language in your head, right?
So for anybody who's listening to this, if you ever get the opportunity to go to Angel Island, like take the tour and walk through this as you listen to this. My grandfather lived through this story. They carved poetry of just pain and misery on the wall. Of the facility that would normally hold 50 was 4 times the national average. They put 200 people inside of it, and people rioted about the conditions was so bad. And it got so bad, what happens is a few people, the people who failed the test, they would get deported, and they didn't want to lose face, right? Our concept in China or in Asian cultures of losing face or facing shame from the people that we bought money from and that didn't want to go face that. About 10% or 200,000 people out of 2 million were sent back. And many of them actually chose to commit suicide rather than face the shame of going home and failing.
Yeah.
And so it turned into a life or death game. Nobody tells you when you buy this thing that it turns into a life or death game.
Yeah.
Luckily, my grandfather got through, and he only knew 2 English words at the time, which was Susun City, which was a place where the army had a job for him. He worked for about $1 a week, and he had to give back 75 cents for room and board, which I discovered on the railroad, right? I think the Chinese were the only ones who were actually had to pay room and board on top of their lowered pay.
Yeah.
And so, but he he actually saved up over the course of 5 years, 40 gold nuggets where he was able to go back to America. He went back to China. He risked possibly not being left, getting back in, but to go get his wife. He had a matchmaker get his wife and brought back, and they had, with about a 3rd grade education, he had 5 kids, all who graduated from college and 2 who are PhDs.
Wow.
So literally, I wouldn't be here in front of all these computers and all this technology and all these executives without the risk-taking of my grandfather.
And that's a life and death risk. I mean, that's serious risk and choice. A lot of what we have today is really not life and death. It's just, being ashamed of failing, and I don't think when who's one of the most successful CEOs ever? You would say Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs failed as much as he succeeded.
Oh yeah.
So without those failures, he wouldn't have been Steve Jobs.
And like David said, he really explored who he was. He spent a lot of time doing things to try and discover who he was.
Yeah.
And that led to some extraordinary, discoveries and other types of things as we went along there.
Yeah.
So Kevin, with this, what are some of your insights from our today's conversation? I mean, I think we're starting with just nothing but appreciation, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think all the guests were their wealth of experience and their generosity in sharing that experience with everybody, I think is just to be commended. I mean, as a rule, as a culture, we don't like to talk about ourselves, but between Brent and Twee and David, yourself and me, we are putting it out there, this is our experiences and we're not ashamed to talk about it. In fact, if it helps, I always say, if what I've gone through helps at least one person, then sharing it was worth the potential embarrassment, But I will say, David talked about it, and when I mentor people, and I've actually written and lectured about developing your personal brand, I think a lot of that comes from being self-aware and the ability to kind of recognize and realize that in order to be successful, your success is really your impact on others, your ability to influence others, right? And if you're very self-centric and you only care about yourself or whatever, people can't relate to you, and they're not going to follow you because there's nothing in it for them. But I think, like Brent talked about, being kind and doing things for others. Twee talked about that. David talked about that. You and I have talked about that. It's all about that. It's about genuinely caring about others, and doing what's right for, like my parents taught me, doing what's right for others and not yourself. Right. And by doing that, you can never make a wrong decision, because you're not making that decision selfishly for you. You're making that to benefit everybody else. And I remember when I was president of NBTA, which is now GBTA, and the first non-white president, by the way, and still today the only ethnic person ever to hold that role.
Wow.
I had to, my board of governors were mostly white people and Caucasians and one black person, and they all were type triple double A personalities, and they all were very successful business people, both on the buyer side and the supplier side. And we had a full staff in Alexandria, and on top of all of that, I had to bring the organization and make it survive through 9/11, where the whole industry shut down. Right?
Wow.
And if you're an association and you're depending on supplier dollars to keep your association going, we got close to just closing the door. So as president, imagine being the leader of all of that and having to deal with 9/11 and it forces you to make decisions, not because of what's good for you, but really the survival of the industry and the association. And when you're thinking in those terms, it really elevates your impact on others and your ability to really communicate, inspire, and lead other people into joining you in doing what's better for everyone, and not take the self-interest off of themselves. And that was an invaluable lesson to me. And at the end of all of that, I thought, if I can live through that and grow from that and come through that, I can do anything.
Well, let's close with this, Kevin. We'll get each of us get a shot here to what advice do we have for all the up and coming APIs? And I'm just going to start with this one, which is, say yes, right? I do think say yes is something that's really important. I'll give a shout out to the Rainier Club in Seattle, which is it has one of the older membership. It has one of the less diverse memberships to begin with. And they actually took all the people who won the award 40 under 40 as one of their strategies, and they gave everyone a free membership for a year.
Wow.
And I walked in that place, and I got to be straight up about Kevin, right? This is one of the places I walked through, and I'm like, this place is not for me. And I hope this is kind of where David was going with this. That's one of the reasons why you should say yes.
Yes, that's right.
Is because there's two parts. One is that's the opportunity. Somebody opened the crack in the door. What I always tell people in the opportunity in the crack of the door is stick your foot in it, then wedge your body into it, and then get in there, and then see if you can invite other people. And so what I did was, by becoming a member, they had open events, and I started actually being one of the, bringing in the most diverse members. Sometimes I would bring 20 and 30 people of diversity who had never seen this Rainier Club. I think a lot of them just said yes to it just to see what the inside of the stupid club was.
Just to check it out.
Yeah. But so that actually helped me, because that one is I was starting to make change inside of there.
Yeah.
Right. And some of them became members. And then, again, that's where the change can happen without you having to do things beat over the head. But I can say that when people say yes and give you that opportunity, I think what you need to do is say yes, represent, and then say who you can also bring in with you.
Yeah. It's all about inclusion.
Yeah. What about you, Kevin, as closing words?
I think, in order to get better, you really need to fail. I really believe that. I think too much of us grow up with this pressure of trying to be perfect, trying to be what we're not, trying to not be. I always tell the folks that I mentor, be yourself, just be your authentic self. Don't try to be somebody else, because you are who you are, and you need to love and embrace that. And the moment you do that, everything will be a lot clearer for you, and it'll be a lot, more, you'll be much more confident in yourself and what your purpose is and what you're trying to accomplish. But it's about caring for others, and it's really about being true to yourself and not being afraid to fail.
Well, on behalf of all the Asian Pacific Islanders who are represented here in our audience and anybody who is listening in, Kevin, I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience here. Thank you for sharing that message too about do whatever it takes, right, to discover your confidence with that. And I think that that's really a key piece with that. So Kevin, I just wanted to say thank you. And I'm going to end our live stream, and we're going to have a little after hours with a few people that we have left. Unless, Jolene, did you want to pop on, or did you want to come on after hours? Just want to check.
Oh, just wanted to say thank you. And to all of you and John for tirelessly bringing up the issues into very, very white spaces. And you do so much volunteer work, and it's just so appreciated. So thank you.
Ditto back to you, Jolene. Check out jolenejang.com, especially things like her timeline and her videos. Thank you, Jolene. And so with that, Kevin, thank you again on behalf of you and Bisley and all the things that you're doing. I'm honored to be able to work with you here.
Oh, thank you.
Part of
Same
the
here.
event profs. Excellent. All right, I'm John Chen here, signing off for API Heritage Month. Make sure, stop Asian hate, and see if you're listening to this, right? See what you can do to be an ally and help out. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.